Hello everyone and welcome back to another Babbling Irons video. Today, myself and Mike are going to be comparing our season so far with maybe what could have been expected due to the expected stats. You guys are probably familiar with XG, so we're going to analyze and look and kind of compare how we're doing compared to the expected stats for this season so far. So Mike, we are in a pretty tough spot at the moment. We've got the international break, so I hope you've been getting some much needed rest away from West Ham at the moment for this past couple of days. But we're going to look at the expected stats in a bit more detail shortly. But just to kind of summarize, how do you feel about XG and all of these kind of new ways of analyzing data for your team? And do you take it with a pinch of salt, or is there actually kind of some stuff underneath there that is valuable to look at?
Yeah, so the way XG and those are often used, I think, has to be taken with a pinch of salt. It's often kind of used in which to say, or people utilize it, go, oh, well, this team had far more chances, or this team deserved to win. But all it's doing really is measuring the percentage that those chances generated had. So accumulation means that you may look like you had a good chance, but let's take, for example, if you have a penalty, that's almost an expected goal. It can be skewed. Ultimately, there are other factors and other metrics underneath that are used outside of essentially the commentary sphere or the media sphere that go along with that, which look at what the positions of those shots, where those shots were taken, and so on and so forth. And there are probably about 5 or 6, 7 different other attributes that sit behind those.
Yeah.
But as a layman's point of view, it helps to give it an indicator as to your either effectiveness to take chances and your conversion, or I guess really maybe your issues at defending chances. So it does have a place in football. How heavily it's leaned on, I do think at times is a little bit too much, because there are other stats in behind that. Yeah, and that goes across the board. Even when we're talking things around passing percentages and the completion rates, there's a far larger conversation, but it's often brought down to the very base level, which really doesn't tell a whole story and actually can give a misleading narrative.
Yeah, what I kind of like about it is if you look at it game per game basis, it's pretty skewed because it's like you mentioned, you could accumulate loads of different shots in a match and you'll have a higher XG if you play a team that didn't have as many shots, but doesn't necessarily mean you're creating a lot of good chances. But what I like is just throughout the whole season, throughout a 38 game period, it should show a kind of indication as to how you've performed versus how you should perform, which I like as well as a fan. So we're going to break it down with 12 games left to play for West Ham. We're going to look at our expected goals scored, expected goals against, and our expected points compared to how we're actually doing in the league. So let's start with the expected goals scored. It's always a nice place to start. So as you can see here, we've played 26 games in the league. We've only scored 24 goals, which I didn't realize our output was that bad, less than a goal a game. And you kind of look at the expected goals, it's 34.42. So you can kind of see there that the difference, it shouldn't be 14, it should be 10. But you can see that at the moment we are ranking 15th in the league for kind of expected goals scored. And, if you look at the stats, it should be 12. So the big thing from there, it wasn't even the expected stats for me. It was we've only scored 24 goals in 26 matches this season. I mean, that is pretty low.
Yeah, it is. It's appalling. So it's kind of, you do look at it and think, what the hell? And obviously, this is one stat completely different away from this, but just looking up Scamacca, for instance, in the games that he has played, obviously he scored 3 in the Premier League, but he's actually, from an XG point of view, he is almost bang on track. He's expected goals, essentially as an average. It's actually so. He's expected to have scored 3.3 goals over the course of this season. In the Premier League, he has scored 3 goals. If we then look at that in terms of in other competitions that he's played, he's actually had an expected goal rate of 6.39 and also gone and scored 8. So there, when you look at it as a collective, certain players are definitely underperforming. If you look at it as individuals, some are actually playing and performing to the right level in terms of they are, in that case of Scamacca, across all competitions, he's exceeding his XG. So he's actually doing far better for us than others. So it's one of those things really that we players are letting us down in a collective sense. Scamacca with his point, I think it's 3.33, and obviously only scoring 3, you would argue that maybe could have had another goal.
It's minimal, isn't it? At that point, it's not.
But at that point, yeah, it's negligible, because you would argue that it's actually in the lesser percentage or the lesser percentile for him to have scored. So it's one of those when you look at it and go, well, actually, certain players are meeting a standard where others are actually have really dropped the ball for us this season, whereas last season they were far more accomplished. And this is why we're in the predicament we are. It's certain players have unfortunately dropped off the face, this year.
Yeah.
We could go on, and it's not me picking out a player, but Antonio this season should technically have almost 5 goals. He's only on 3. I think Bowen is even worse because he's also missed penalties this season. I'm just also checking these out on Wyscout as well while we're doing this.
Do you think that, because the difference there was about 10 goals. So we're 10 goals worse off than we should be in terms of goals scored. So that really is just a kind of, it just really does summarize how bad we've been in front of goal. And it's not necessarily that we haven't had the chances to score them. It's that we just haven't taken them.
So Bowen is technically, according to Wyscout information, for this season in the Premier League, has an expected goal return of 7.82. He scored 4 goals this season.
Yeah.
That, again, kind of points it out. As we said with Antonio, he's also has quite a high expectation. Well, fairly high expectation. I think he should be roughly on about 5 goals, according to, again, Wyscout. So, he's 4.73 and scored 3. So, when you look at that, that's already 5 goals between 2 players that are ultimately missing.
Yeah.
Some of those have been penalties, obviously with the likes of Bowen, which has meant that we lost the game against Liverpool. Not just that incident, let's be fair, but it's a contributing factor because that was the penalty, and the odds are stacked in his favour. It's almost, I think, a 70% or 75% success rate at a penalty.
Yeah.
Depends sometimes. It might drop.
I think it's 0.7 normally. Yeah.
Yeah. So exactly, which is a 70% success rate.
Yeah.
So it's that point of we're having players that are getting high value opportunities and they are ultimately, for lack of a better term, fluffing their lines. And that has impacted us throughout the season. And when you consider that you should have at least 2 players that should have 5 goals extra between them, that could be the difference of 6 points in the season. And that 6 points currently puts us 12th with about 3 points difference between, about 6 points difference, I think that would put us between us and the relegation zone. So when you start to equate it like that, and that's just 2 players with the goals missed, and you've mentioned we're quite substantially down on that total, the actual figures and numbers could be a lot higher, which could be the difference, and I'm pretty sure we're going to show that, of actually 2 extra positions. We wouldn't be 12. We would actually be higher if others were meeting the standard that we would expect from a goals scored point of view, but also there's an impact, as we've discussed, from goals against as well. So
I think also, considering, even though, based on XG, we would only be 12th for goals scored anyway. That's pretty low compared to what we should be doing anyway. We should be in that top 8-7 for expected goals with the players we have. But I think that, again, is kind of an indication of how we play at the moment under Moyes, and such a defensive kind of structure and an emphasis on kind of keeping the opposition at bay if we can, and trying to strike in moments when we do have those moments on the pitch. But let's move on to the defensive side of things, because it kind of then resonates with what we've just said about kind of being more defensive. So this one's really interesting to me because we've played 26 games. We've only conceded 34 goals. Now, that is actually pretty impressive, considering, in my mind, I don't remember the last time we kept back-to-back clean sheets, for example. It seems like we always kind of concede. So to see that was pretty crazy. Obviously, not too much difference in the goals conceded expected column as well, 32.69. So we're only 1.31 worse off than we're expected to be, which isn't that much of a big difference in the grand scheme of things. So you look at the difference there. At the moment, we have the 8th best defense in the league, and on the expected stats, we should have the fifth best defensive record in the league. So that is kind of crazy, because I don't think we've been defensively very good this season, but clearly we've only conceded a certain amount of goals. But I think that then takes into factors like, again, play style, and if you look at our offensive output, it doesn't balance enough. You can be focused on defensive stuff all you like. If you're not scoring goals, then there's no point in having that stat. So what did you take from that, Mike? Because that was kind of my summary from it.
Yeah, I think if you look at it in isolation, we're looking good. We've conceded a couple of easy goals, you would then suggest, based on that, which could be the difference between 3 points and so on. So in theory, we're doing well. We're good, or we're strong defensively. We give little opportunity to the opposition, and we tend to keep the ball out the back of our net. So in isolation, it actually looks quite good. And you would suggest that if you had a strike force that you had a team that had that as a defensive output, and it had very positive attacking outputs, that's a team pushing comfortably within the top 6, potentially pushing for a top fair kind of 5, maybe 6 position, because the defense is resolute and strong. The problem is what it actually points to, if you're looking at it from a wider view, is that we are a team that sits and holds a team out. We're good at not conceding. We're good at keeping kind of teams out and kind of shutting teams out in some respects, or at least conceding very few in games.
It's normally kind of 1 goal or 1, maybe 2 max, other than the Brighton game. It's rare that we get smashed in a game.
No, exactly. And that's, I think, the first time this season we've been done by more than 2 goals.
Yeah.
Which is saying something, because we would all argue we've been pretty poor this year. But that's the first time this season we've conceded more than 2, I believe. So yeah, it just shows that, again, it looks good from a defensive standpoint, but then when you start to add that then with things such as, well, the depth of the defensive line, and then you start to then add in, well, how many chances you creating per game, and then your expected goals as a kind of return, you then start to see that, well, actually it paints a picture of a very negative team. And another point to that is also it's like passes per defensive action is another one that can help you understand that defensive line, because then it allows you to then review as to, well, how many passes did the opposition make before you press, or you look to go into a duel, or so on. So, like I say, isolation, it looks great. But when you start to add in the other factors, you really starts to build a very negative, or as some would say, pragmatic approach to football.
Yeah, I think that's kind of really good point in terms of, isolation. Again, defensively isolated, we've been very good compared to the stats. 8th best defensive record in the Premier League this season. Then you look at the expected goals scored, or even the goals scored, we're ranking 15th. So you need to balance it. You can't just have one or the other. We could also have, one of the best attacks in the league, but if we had the worst defense in the league, it wouldn't balance out as well. So you need to have that.
Sassuolo is a great example of that last season. They had a phenomenal attack. One of the best in the league in Italy, but defensively they were so weak, and they finished, mid-table in Italy, which is one of the reasons why we managed to get Scamacca. But again, it's like you say, it's that when you look at things in isolation, they can be, oh, that's amazing, look how well we're doing, and then you just go, when you look at the wider picture, it starts to then tell the true story. And this is the problem with statistics, is that you can be very selective with certain aspects and paint a certain picture. Yeah. And then if you start to add in others, you can then start to give counter arguments.
Well, let's look at the kind of expected points versus our actual points tally so far this season before we kind of summarize with the table. But as you can see here, again, 26 games played, 24 points, which is very, very alarming. But this was such a big difference in expected points. We have the biggest difference in margin by any team by quite some way as well. So 24 points, our expected points should be 36.72 right now. And, we look at the difference, 12.72, we should be 10th, but we're actually 18th. Now, again, we kind of have to take it not in isolation and kind of accumulate things, but that is kind of a good consensus as to how much we've underperformed so far this season, and the quality that we have where we should be. You know, granted, it's been a very poor season, but we should be sitting pretty much mid-table. You know, if we were delivering on what is expected of us for this season so far. So, what did you make of that? I mean, 24 points from 26 games is concerning, and such a big difference of over 12 points.
Yeah, it's. I think you'd laugh, otherwise you cry, right?
Yeah.
Again, what the funny part is, had we would be doing to those expectations, we still wouldn't have scored very much. Now, technically speaking, people would then go, well, we're doing very well because we're mid-table, we're in Europa Conference, but the football is appalling. So, you know, had we been meeting those expectations in terms of those goals scored, you could dress up what has been ultimately an incredibly poor season with the fact of, well, we're grinding out results. We're not playing well, but we're grinding out results. And that's often something that's put towards teams that aren't very good. As long as they're getting points, they grind them. They get those points. They get what they need. That's what a good team does. A good team will get points even when they're not playing well. And when you look at all of that together, had we be getting those expected, some would dress it up still as a good season because it would be, well, we're mid-table. We've still got another set of games where we could do a final push for the maybe, you know, Europa Conference qualification again, so on. We're obviously where we are in Europa League. It would be hard to argue that actually as a season it's not been successful. But that's that is the problem with statistics. If you start to then meet those statistics, if we were meeting those points and we were in the position that we should be in, according to, again, statistics and probability and all of that, people would be considering that this season we've done well to consolidate. Yeah. Whereas actually it's that it's probably highlighted rightfully that the team is disjointed and the football's not good enough.
Yeah.
Players do have to take a good level of responsibility there, because obviously they are not meeting their end of the bargain if you look at the statistics. The counter argument, which is maybe a little bit harder to quantify, is, are they being supported in the right or necessary way in which for them to go out and to start hitting those metrics as they should? Again, you can't legislate for a player missing a penalty. I think Bowen's missed 2 this season, and I think even Rice missed 1 as well. So again, those penalties are the difference between potentially 1 point. I think if both those games, it would have been at least saved us a point. So again, that would put us up higher. But yeah, it's. I think the problem is that the stats look, from an expected point of view, they look good. But from what it also does for me is it masks and maybe hides the problem for those who like to maybe put their head in the sand, or they like to constantly try and make a positive out of something rather than actually look at it as it is and say that is not sustainable as a process.
I think also I remember a lot of the times in the early season when people were kind of looking at expected stats and saying we got unlucky, you know, myself included as well. Also, it's really important to kind of mention so far this season, how many times have we conceded the first goal? So our expected stats normally come from being 1-0 down and just having to create something and trying to get a goal back. So it's not like we've taken control of a match very often this season and dominated, and, you know, our expected stats have been better than the opposition through merit. It's been probably the opposite, where we've conceded a very sloppy goal, we've been poor, and then we've had to go at it for the last 30 minutes, and we've actually started playing some nice football. But I think overall, it's kind of a nice summary to kind of look at the expected table. So as you can see here, based on expected points, we would be 10th. And yeah, it's such a big landslide. I mean, the difference there of 12.72 points this season really does highlight just how poor we have been. And the fact that we're 18th, we shouldn't be. We just shouldn't be.
As well is Fulham currently 8th. They are absolutely, they're 8th obviously in the league, but look where they are there.
Yeah.
So it just shows again that Fulham in itself, as an example, are hugely overperforming. If you look around the bottom of the table, pretty much all of those around that bottom, bar the likes of, Leicester are pretty much in the same-ish position. Southampton obviously doing better, but ultimately the bottom of the table doesn't lie, bar, if you go from this, essentially, or the top of the table doesn't lie, apart from necessarily with Fulham, who are exceptionally exceeding, which you would then say that as a continuation into next season, it'd probably be quite difficult if they continue to play in the same vein, then to continue and to defy statistics as they have will probably be difficult for them next season. We're showing, obviously, that we are underperforming based on that. And, what's going to be interesting, obviously, as you say, you were caught in but look at the statistics. Statistics are saying well, but statistics only tell one side of the story, doesn't give to the nuances. And obviously me and Sloth throughout that period were saying, no, we're in trouble. We're not doing well enough. And there are worrying signs that the statistics don't essentially back up.
Yeah, what I will say from the kind of expected statistics side is, looking at this table here, it is, like you mentioned, pretty much as you'd expect it to be with the teams around it, other than us and, say, Fulham, for example. So, again, Arsenal are quite a big drop-off in points as well. They've been overperforming this season, clearly. So I think overall it does have, throughout the whole season, it will accumulate and show you a pretty good measuring of how you've done compared to how you should be doing. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've kind of tried to get through with what I've been saying around expected statistics, is that in the long run, it will show you where you are. But the problem we've got right now is we're just not performing to what we should be. So I remember what you were saying about we are in trouble, but if we'd have had a better approach to matches and, actually capitalized on these expected chances that we've created, we wouldn't be in this position. So I kind of understood the point of where we were kind of heading, but I think the expected stats here do kind of show that we are massively underperforming so far this season, and we really shouldn't be where we are in this relegation battle.
We're underperforming from a points perspective, but from a goals point of view, we're not that. I think we're 10 goals off where we should be, if I remember rightly what you put up there.
Yeah.
From a defensive point of view, we are. You can argue underperforming because you conceded 2 extra goals. But ultimately, we are on task and we are on point. But everywhere else we're massively underperforming. So it's where we are. We unfortunately have gone into this defensive mindset. You could argue it was always there, but this season it seems to have dropped more. We press less. We sit deeper.
Yeah,
now that means that we concede less from a chances perspective, and we concede less in terms of a goals point of view. But our starting position is so deep that we're not in a position to get forward with enough regularity in which to, deal with the fact that we need a lot of chances to score.
What I will say as well is that the goals we have scored this season, it's been very rare that we've created a chance by breaking a team down or breaking through a team. It's been a moment of magic from someone like Benrahma or Scamacca, or something like a penalty like you mentioned, or just something like a set piece. It hasn't ever really been a nice general piece of play to break a team down, maybe 1, 2, 3 times a season. But 24 goals scored in 26 games, nowhere near good enough. And what you mentioned there, dropping deeper, pressing less, all of those other statistics we haven't even mentioned accumulate into what this is. So I think we take it with a pinch of salt, to be honest. But it does, I think the main message behind it is we're severely underperforming as a football club and a team right now. And I think every West Ham fan knows that, but it's nice to see the numbers and the breakdown behind it. So let us know what you guys think in the comments about kind of expected statistics and how we've performed so far this season. Do you think it's a good measurement to kind of gauge where we are as a football club right now with 12 games left of the Premier League season? And we've got, like we just mentioned, 12 games to save this season and hopefully turn it round into Premier League stability and potentially a Europa Conference League run to the final as well. So that's going to be all from us today. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, and Mike, one thing left for us to say.
Come on, you Irons.